My name is Harley Holt. I'm 41. I was still wearing the black coat from the cemetery when my mother slid a folder across the dining table and told me I needed to sign it before the end of the week. She said it lightly, like she was reminding me to mail a check, not asking me to give up control of my son's trust less than 24 hours after I buried him. The folder was thick, too thick to be casual. My father was already seated at the head of the table, hands folded, eyes steady. My sister sat to his right, scrolling on her phone until I sat down, then placing it face down beside her coffee mug. There was a pen waiting on top of the papers. Blue ink, new. No one mentioned the funeral. No one asked how I got home. No one acknowledged that the dirt was still fresh. "We've spoken to people," my father said, as if that settled something. "This is the responsible step." I didn't open the folder. I rested my hands in my lap and kept them there because they were shaking and I didn't want them to see it. My mother leaned back in her chair. "You're not thinking clearly right now," she said. "Anyone would understand that." The word anyone hung in the air, longer than it needed to. My sister finally looked at me. "It's temporary," she said. "Administrative, you don't lose anything." I asked who drafted the documents. My father didn't answer right away. He glanced at the clock instead, then back at me. "We don't have a lot of time," he said. "There are deadlines, and frankly, this kind of money attracts attention." That was the first time anyone said the word money out loud. I stood up and walked to the window. Their dining room faces the street. A delivery truck was parked crooked at the curb. Someone was unloading boxes. Life moving forward at a pace that felt insulting. Behind me, paper shifted, the soft scrape of the folder being nudged closer. "You should sit," my mother said. "This won't take long." I didn't sit. I asked why none of them had come that morning. There was a pause, not confusion, not surprise, calculation. My sister exhaled through her nose. "This isn't the time," she said. "We can talk about feelings later." My father cleared his throat. "We're trying to protect you," he said. "You've been overwhelmed." I turned back then. I looked at the folder, at the pen, at the way my name had already been typed beneath several blank lines. "Protect me from what?" I asked. No one answered directly. Instead, my mother said, "Sign, Harley, let us help you." Help had never looked like paperwork before. I finally sat, but I didn't touch the pen. I opened the folder just enough to see the heading. Words like reallocation, trustee, capacity. The language was clean and confident. It assumed cooperation. The trust was just under $750,000, set up years earlier and never meant to be complicated. "I'm not signing anything today," I said. The room changed. My father's jaw tightened. My sister straightened in her chair. My mother's mouth pulled thin, the way it used to when she decided something was about to become difficult on purpose. "That's not wise," my father said. "We've already started the process." I looked up. "What process?" He hesitated, just a beat. "Enough. There are safeguards," he said carefully. "If you won't do this voluntarily, there are other avenues." I understood then that this wasn't a request. It was a step I was expected to comply with so something else wouldn't happen. My sister reached for the pen and held it out toward me, palm up. "Please don't make this harder than it needs to be." I stood again, slowly. I closed the folder and slid it back across the table, stopping it well short of where it had started. "I need time," I said. My mother laughed. It was short and sharp and out of place. "You've had enough time," she said. "Everyone has been waiting." Waiting for what? She didn't say. As I walked toward the door, my father followed me into the hall. His voice dropped. "If you leave without signing," he said, "you're forcing our hand." I didn't ask what that meant. I already felt it moving, something set in motion that wouldn't pause just because I was tired or grieving or done. I picked up my coat. My keys were where I'd left them. At least that hadn't changed. When I stepped outside, my phone buzzed in my pocket, a notification I didn't open. Not yet. I sat in my car for a long moment before turning the key, staring at the front door of the house I'd grown up in, knowing that whatever came next wouldn't stay contained there. I drove home without turning on the radio. The silence felt steadier than anything else I could choose. When I pulled into my driveway, my phone buzzed again. It was my mother. "We're worried about you," the message said. "This isn't about money, it's about stability." I didn't respond. I let the screen go dark and stayed in the car until my hands stopped shaking enough to open the door. Inside, everything was where I'd left it. The extra chair still pushed against the wall, a half-rinsed glass on the counter. I took off my coat and hung it up carefully, like I was proving I could still do ordinary things. An hour later, my father called. I let it go to voicemail. He left 2 messages. The first was calm and procedural, timing, fiduciary duty, oversight. The second was sharper. He warned that delaying decisions could raise questions. I deleted them. The next morning, my sister emailed a spreadsheet, projected expenses, hypothetical returns, a column labeled family obligations, several cells highlighted. At the bottom, this is why we need to act quickly. Around noon, another message arrived, framed as concern. You don't have to carry this alone, my mother wrote. We're trying to relieve you of pressure. Pressure, apparently, was what followed refusal. None of them asked how I'd slept or whether I'd eaten. The messages were efficient, forward-looking. They treated grief like a scheduling conflict. That afternoon, my father stopped by unannounced. I saw his car from the living room window before he knocked. I didn't move right away. I finished rinsing the mug and set it upside down on the towel. When I opened the door, he didn't step inside. He stayed on the porch, hands in his coat pockets. We don't want this to turn adversarial, he said. I nodded once. He glanced past me into the house. You're not equipped to manage this right now, he added. Anyone in your position would struggle. I said nothing. After a moment, he sighed, as if disappointed by my lack of cooperation. There are expectations, he said. Extended family, commitments already made. Commitments to whom? I asked. He didn't answer directly. He shifted his weight, looked down at the porch boards. You'll see, he said, sooner or later. When he left, he didn't say goodbye. That evening, I pulled the folder they'd given me out of my bag and set it on the table. I didn't open it. I just looked at it, the weight of it, the certainty it carried on their behalf. I slid it into a drawer and closed it. I didn't know yet what refusing would cost me, but I understood now that rushing was the thing they needed most. So I didn't. That night, after the house settled into the kind of quiet that only comes after midnight, I opened the drawer again. I set the folder on the kitchen table and opened it slowly, page by page. I didn't read for meaning at first. I looked at dates, letterheads, signatures. The language was dense, confident. This wasn't something drafted in a hurry. On the 3rd page, I noticed the date at the bottom. It wasn't recent. It was more than a year old. I flipped back, then forward again. Different revisions, different timestamps, all reaching further back than I expected. I closed the folder and sat back. My hands were steady. I pulled my laptop closer and logged into the trust portal I hadn't opened since before everything changed. It loaded after a pause. There was a section labeled Authorized Inquiries. I opened it and saw names, dates, brief summaries of calls, some marked general information requested, others more specific. The earliest inquiry was dated 14 months earlier. I closed the laptop. Nothing dramatic happened. No sudden clarity, just the understanding that this wasn't a misunderstanding or a moment of poor judgment. It was a plan. The next morning, I made one call. I didn't explain much. I asked for an appointment. I used my full name. I scheduled it for the earliest opening they had. When I hung up, I wrote the date and time on a scrap of paper and taped it to the fridge. It felt important to see it. By afternoon, my phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't a call or a text, it was a calendar invite. No message, just a meeting request from my sister marked urgent. I declined it without adding a note. Later that evening, I noticed a car parked across the street longer than usual. It might have been nothing, it probably was, but I watched it until it drove away. I understood then that whatever they thought they were managing, it had already moved beyond a private family conversation. The burial itself had been quiet, not peaceful, just small. I stood beside the grave with my hands folded because I didn't know what else to do with them. The casket looked lighter than it should have been. I remember noticing that first, and then noticing that there were only 2 chairs set out. One for me, one for the man from the cemetery who didn't sit. The months before had followed a pattern, appointments every other week until they became weekly. blood draws, adjustments, waiting rooms where the chairs were bolted to the floor. He learned which nurses warmed their hands before touching him. He learned to count ceiling tiles. I learned which vending machines swallowed dollar bills and which one didn't. He never complained. That's what people like to say. What's more accurate is that he adapted. Children do. My parents came once early on and stayed for 15 minutes. My sister sent articles. My closest friend checked in by text, then less often, then not at all. No one asked for the schedule. No one asked what the doctors said after the visits that ran long. On the morning of the funeral, my phone stayed quiet until just before the service started. I checked it because I was standing alone and because habits are hard to break. My sister had posted a photo, a long table, white flowers, champagne glasses catching the light. The caption was about beginnings. The timestamp matched the hour printed on the program in my hand. I locked my phone and put it back in my coat pocket. I didn't look again. The only person who stood beside me that day was Mrs. Calder from next door. She brought tissues in her purse the way some people carry keys. She didn't say much. She just stayed close enough that I could feel the warmth of another person without having to turn toward it. When it was over, she walked me back to my car and waited while I sat there longer than necessary. "You did right by him," she said finally. It wasn't reassurance. It was a statement. Later that afternoon, she came by with soup I didn't eat and sat at my kitchen table while I stared at the wall. At some point, I mentioned the trust without meaning to. Just the fact of it, that his father had set it up years ago, long before any of this, and insisted everything be documented properly. That there were instructions. Clear ones. "He was thorough," I said. Mrs. Calder nodded, like that made sense. That night, after she left, I scrolled again. Not because I wanted to see more, but because I needed to know whether the first post had been a mistake. It hadn't been. There were more photos, smiling faces, comments, plans for the weekend. I set the phone down on the counter and turned it face down. I noticed then that no one had called to ask where the flowers should go. The next morning, the messages about paperwork started. The message came while I was still in the clothes from the cemetery. I was sitting at the kitchen table with the chair pulled too close, the way I used to sit when I was tired. My phone buzzed against the wood. I expected it to be nothing, a notification I could ignore. It was my mother. "We need to meet tomorrow," she wrote. "Bring the trust paperwork." No greeting, no pause. I stared at the screen long enough that it dimmed and went dark. When it lit again, there was a second message. "This can't wait, it affects everyone." I typed back that I had just buried my son. I didn't add anything else. The reply came almost immediately. "Don't be dramatic, Haley. This is important." That was the moment things lined up, not emotionally, logically. I set the phone down and felt the room steady around me. The clock on the stove blinked because I hadn't reset it after the last power outage. Outside, a lawn sprinkler clicked on somewhere down the block. Mrs. Calder knocked a few minutes later. She didn't wait for an answer. She never did. She held a paper bag in one hand and my mail in the other. "You left this in the box," she said, placing the envelopes on the counter. She saw my face before I said anything. I handed her the phone. She read the messages once, then again, slower. Her mouth tightened. "They're moving fast," she said. I hadn't used that phrase yet, but hearing it out loud made something settle. "They already have," I said. She looked at the kitchen chair, then at me. "Sit," she said, not unkindly. I sat. "They didn't come today," she said, not asking. I shook my head. She nodded once, as if confirming something she'd suspected. "Then they shouldn't be asking you for anything tomorrow." I didn't respond. I was thinking about the dates I'd seen on the documents, about the portal, about the word everyone. Mrs. Calder took my phone and turned it face down on the table. "You don't answer this tonight," she said. "You don't answer it alone." I watched her hands, the way she moved without hesitation, the way she treated the situation as something practical, not emotional. When she left, she stood in the doorway longer than usual. "They're not worried about you," she said. "They're worried about access." After the door closed, I powered my phone off completely. The next morning, before the sun was fully up, I put the folder back in my bag and drove away from the house without telling anyone where I was going. When I pulled into my parents' driveway, there was already another car there. I recognized it immediately, my friend Leela's. She parked the way she always did, too close to the hedge. Seeing it made my stomach drop in a quiet, precise way. Inside, the house smelled like coffee and printer ink. The dining table had been cleared completely. In its place were neat stacks of paper, clipped and labeled. My father stood at the far end, sleeves rolled up, glasses on. My mother sat beside him with a legal pad. My sister was already there, laptop open, fingers resting on the keyboard like she'd been waiting for me to arrive so something could officially begin. Leela sat near the window. She didn't stand when she saw me. My father gestured to a chair. Let's just go through this calmly. No one asked if I wanted coffee. He started talking right away, using words like structure and oversight. My sister slid a document toward me, explaining that it named her as interim trustee until I was well enough to reassume responsibility. She said it carefully, like she'd practiced the phrasing. My mother added that I'd been under extreme emotional strain, and that anyone objective would agree I needed support making financial decisions. I picked up the first page and looked at the footer. The date wasn't recent. I flipped to the next document, earlier still. These were prepared months ago, I said. My father didn't deny it. We wanted to be ready, he said, given the circumstances. Leela finally spoke. We were worried about you, she said, eyes fixed on the table. You weren't yourself. I looked at her then, at the way she wouldn't meet my gaze, at the signature page in front of her with her name already printed beneath a line marked defiant. She had already chosen a side. As I moved the papers aside, other things slipped loose. A folded set of blueprints, an estimate from a contractor, a glossy brochure for a coastal property, notes about deferred payments, a highlighted email mentioning cash flow issues at my brother-in-law's firm, a message thread about postponing a wedding deposit. No one reached to hide any of it. My sister exhaled, impatient. This is exactly why we need to manage it, she said. There are real needs, real consequences. My father's voice hardened. If you refuse to cooperate, he said, we'll have to explore alternatives. Like what? I asked. He didn't hesitate. Guardianship, he said, temporary, protective. The word landed cleanly, deliberate, practiced. My mother leaned forward. Sign today, she said, and we won't have to take that route. I looked at each of them in turn. At the documents they'd prepared long before I was ready to understand why. At the way the meeting had been arranged, the chairs placed, the pen aligned just right. I closed the folder. I'm not signing, I said. My father stood up. Then you're making a very serious mistake. I picked up my bag. No, I said, I'm just not making it easy. As I walked toward the door, he called after me, telling me not to leave, that this would look bad, that they were only trying to help. I didn't turn around. I stepped outside, got into my car, and drove away without checking my mirrors. I didn't know yet how far they were willing to go, but I knew I wasn't staying in that room another minute. I didn't go home after I left my parents' house. I drove until the tightness in my chest eased enough to think clearly, then pulled into a grocery store parking lot and sat there with my phone in my hand. My ex-husband had been methodical about things like this. That was always his way. Years earlier, when the trust was first set up, he'd mentioned the attorney's name more than once, the way people do when they want you to remember it later. I found it in my contacts without having to search. The receptionist answered on the second ring. I gave my name. There was a pause, brief but noticeable. Then she said the attorney would see me that afternoon. The office was quiet in a deliberate way. Neutral colors, no family photos. When he came in, he didn't rush. He shook my hand and offered condolences without embellishment. I told him what my family had asked for. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't editorialize. I just explained the sequence of events and slid the folder across the desk. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he opened a drawer and took out a thin file. Your ex was very specific, he said. Inside was a notarized statement I had never seen. It was dated years earlier. It spelled out his intent in plain language, what the trust was for, how it was to be managed, and what was to happen if our son didn't live to use it himself. There was no ambiguity. My name was there, clearly, as beneficiary and administrator. No contingencies, no discretionary clauses. He let me read it without comment. When I looked up, he was already pulling another document from the file. A log, phone calls, emails, dates and times. These are inquiries we received, he said, over the past year. I recognized the names immediately. Some of the calls were marked general information. Others weren't. They asked about amendments, about trustee authority, about what would constitute incapacity. The earliest entry was dated well before my son's condition had worsened. They knew, I said. Yes, he said, they did. He closed the file and folded his hands. Legally, they don't have standing to alter this trust. It's solid. That's not where the risk is. The most common approach in situations like this, he continued, is to challenge the administrator rather than the document. They'll argue you're unfit due to grief. They may seek temporary guardianship or conservatorship. He said it calmly, like he was discussing weather. What do? I asked. You prepare, he said, and you don't underestimate how far people will go when they think access is slipping. When I left his office, the sun was already low. I sat in my car for a moment before starting the engine. It was clear, it had always been. What wasn't clear yet was how loudly my family was willing to contest it. I suggested we meet somewhere public. I didn't frame it as a condition. I said it like a courtesy, as if I were trying to make things easier. My mother agreed immediately. That alone told me what they expected. The cafe was busy in the way places get mid-morning. People working on laptops, a couple with a stroller near the window. I chose a small table in the corner where the light was even and the noise stayed low. I arrived early. I ordered tea. I set a plain manila envelope on the table and didn't open it. They came together. My parents first, then my sister a step behind. She scanned the room before sitting down, eyes flicking briefly to the envelope. My father smiled. I'm glad you're being reasonable. My sister reached for the envelope without looking at me. I put my hand on it, not to pull it back, just to stop it from moving. Before anyone could speak, I asked a single question. Why didn't you come to the funeral? There was a pause. My mother inhaled as if preparing to explain something that had already been rehearsed. It was a difficult day for everyone, she said. We didn't want to distract you. I nodded once and opened the envelope. The first thing I took out wasn't paperwork. It was my phone. I turned the screen toward them. The photo filled the space between us, the long table, the glasses, the caption. The timestamp was visible. My sister's face changed first. My father looked away. My mother stared at the table. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't say anything else about it. I let the image sit there until the silence became noticeable to the people at the next table. Then I slid the notarized trust statement across to my father. I've spoken with counsel, I said. This is the governing document. My sister scoffed. That doesn't mean. It does, I said. There are no provisions for reassignment. No clauses you can invoke. My father scanned the page, jaw tightening. You didn't need to do this publicly. I did, I said. My sister pushed her chair back slightly. You're being irrational, she said. This money isn't yours to control. A woman at the next table looked up. I met my sister's eyes. Neither is my grief, I said. My father closed the document and slid it back toward me. His voice was low. This isn't over. I know, I said. My mother stood abruptly, chair legs scraping the floor. Let's go, she said, already reaching for her purse. My sister lingered a moment longer, then stood as well. She didn't look at me when she left. They walked out separately, the space they'd occupied collapsing in on itself. Conversations around us resumed. I finished my tea after they were gone. It had gone cold. I didn't feel relieved, just clear. 2 days after the cafe, I was back in the attorney's office. He didn't waste time easing into it. He set a legal pad between us and wrote one word across the top. Guardianship. They'll file, he said. Soon, they'll frame it as concern, temporary, protective. I nodded. I'd already stopped hoping they wouldn't. We started laying things out methodically. Not a story, a record. Medical records first. Every appointment, every admission. Notes from nurses who'd written that I was present for rounds, that I asked questions, that I stayed. We arranged them in order not to prove devotion but consistency. Then financial statements, hospital bills, insurance correspondence, spreadsheets I'd kept without realizing why. There were no gaps, no unexplained withdrawals, just months of careful management stretched thin. We built a timeline on the wall, not dramatic, just factual. Dates of treatments, dates I took leave from work, dates my parents and sister hadn't visited, 0 entries for them after the first month. Absence matters, the attorney said. Courts notice patterns. Mrs. Calder brought over 3 notebooks that afternoon. She'd been keeping them for years, daily entries, short observations, when my lights were on late, when the car left early, when the porch light stayed on all night after hospital trips. She didn't editorialize, she just wrote. We added statements from my son's doctor and his teacher. Both brief, both clear. They spoke about routine, stability, my presence. I scheduled a psychiatric evaluation without being asked. It felt like another appointment on a list I'd grown used to keeping. I showed up on time. I answered questions plainly. I didn't explain myself more than necessary. That same week I had cameras installed. Not everywhere, just the front and back, enough to know who came close to the house. The attorney called one evening to tell me my sister had requested copies of my son's medical records using an outdated emergency contact form. They shouldn't have released anything, he said. We're addressing it. Around the same time, a former colleague messaged me to ask if everything was okay. She'd been contacted by someone in my family asking about my emotional state at work. I didn't respond. I forwarded the message. My sister's social media shifted tone. Subtle at first. Articles about grief impairing judgment. Posts about hard choices families have to make. Nothing explicit, enough to suggest instability without naming it. The attorney added another section to our preparation. Defamation, harassment, a request for restraining orders if needed. By the end of the week, the wall in his conference room was full. Not overwhelming, just complete. As I left that night, Mrs. Calder texted to tell me the cameras were working, that the house looked quiet, that she was keeping an eye out. I slept for 4 uninterrupted hours. It felt like progress. The day the papers were served, I was at home going through mail when the process server showed up. He handed me a thick envelope and a clipboard. Inside was an emergency petition for guardianship. There was an affidavit from Leela, my former friend, describing times when she said I'd struggled to cope during my son's illness. She described moments of exhaustion and sadness, laid out in clinical terms that made it sound like evidence. They highlighted my depleted savings, as if managing medical bills was the same as financial recklessness. That afternoon, I saw the local paper online. The headline read, "Family seeks help for grieving mother." Underneath was a quote from my father, carefully worded. "This breaks our hearts, but we have to protect her from herself." On social media, my sister had posted again. This time, a long message about mental health awareness, grief support, and how important it is to recognize when someone needs help. It was polished, heartfelt, but unmistakably a public performance. My attorney called later to update me. The hospital's ethics committee had confirmed unauthorized access to my son's medical records. They were investigating how my sister had obtained the documents. Then came the footage. Late one night, the security cameras had caught my sister and mother trying to open the gate to my property. Neither had a key. They left quickly when the lights came on. The attorney filed for a restraining order the next day. That evening, I received messages from neighbors I barely knew, offers of support, signed petitions about my character, reassurances that the block was behind me. The family's moves were no longer quiet, but neither was my defense. It was just before 10 when the knock came, sharp, deliberate. I was alone in the living room. I'd set my phone on the table, recording app open without making a fuss. I didn't need to watch her face to know it was my sister. She stepped inside before I could answer, pushing the door open as if it belonged to her. Her voice was low but urgent. "We don't have to do this like this," she said. I stayed still, letting the silence fill the room. "I'm asking you to drop the guardianship fight," she said. "Sign over control of the trust to me. It's what's best for everyone." She took a step closer. "You don't want to see what happens if you keep going." I heard the catch in her breath as she added, "I can destroy you. Your reputation, your job, everyone will think you're the unstable one, the problem, the burden." She didn't look away when she said it, didn't soften her tone. Her eyes held steady. I didn't say a word. After a long pause, she turned and left without another word. I stopped the recording, played it back once. I didn't need to hear it again. The guardianship petition was dismissed quietly. The judge found no grounds to question my capacity. The trust remained intact, unbroken by challenge or claim. My family's access to my son's estate ended. Their credibility diminished with every misstep, every unauthorized move exposed in court filings. I kept the documents close. No calls, no meetings, no attempts to bridge the distance. Boundaries were clear, unspoken but firm. They came for what they thought I couldn't protect. They were so wrong. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed it, consider subscribing and liking the video. See you in the next one.